everyone, ScowlingAl here, and I think it's time we talk about this milkshaking phenomenon that's been taking place lately. In the UK, there's a party called the UK Independence Party, UKIP. As of late, people affiliated with UKIP have been getting milkshakes and even fish thrown at them. In the past weeks, the notable UKIP figures getting milkshaked have been Nigel Farage, the former leader of UKIP from 06 to 09 and again from 2010 to 2016, Stephen Yaxley Lennon, also known as Tommy Robinson, a UKIP political advisor, and Carl Benjamin, who is a self-described centrist but is, for all intents and purposes, an alt-right sympathizing shitlord. He was not milkshaked, but fished. Why are they getting milkshaked exactly? It's an act of protest by the common people against Brexit leaders due to their exacerbation of social tensions.
And no, it's not all men who act this way, but you know what? It's way too many.
Which is ironic considering that before your stupid social justice feminine bullshit, it didn't happen on this scale. It's crazy. This is a disease of the modern age. You are responsible for perpetuating it by disenfranchising these poor fucking guys who don't have any options left. When someone takes the option of absolute, insanely last resort, you have to wonder what kind of system is producing them. And I tell you what, Lacey, it is a fucking feminist system that's doing this.
In the last year, activist Tommy Robinson has been systematically erased from social media, mostly under false pretenses, for the sake of simply being rid of someone who is observing and presenting the problems inherent with Islamic immigration to the West.
The UK Independence Party that these people are tied to is in accordance with the Brexit movement. So, what comes in tandem with all this UKIP and Brexit shit? Basically, where the Brexit conversation originally sprung up around economics, its focus now has become the increase in immigration across the land. Currently, Britain is part of the European Union, and with the European Union comes an open borders policy. Britain is fighting with itself over whether or not to take back control over its borders, trade policies, and immigration policies, while risking economic fallout. They see the European Union essentially as too chaotic of a market and too accepting of immigration. Sounds a little candy-coated, doesn't it? Well, let's peel back the layers to see what's actually in the package here. Brexit is essentially being used as a vehicle for racism and Islamophobia. Any discussion about economics is eventually clouded by anti-immigration rhetoric, which ultimately becomes resentful and bigoted, stirring the pot for racism to bubble to the surface. So, you may see why people might be wary of these guys taking any position involving power. The rhetoric they spout enables the worst types of people to parade their hateful ideologies without fear. With the uptick in hate crimes and the resurgence of Nazi ideas we've experienced in the past few years, it's understandable that people feel afraid. So, let's get back to the milkshaking phenomenon. I think this whole milkshaking thing is great, because it opens up the discussion around civility and violence. So, here's the thing about violence that we have to get straight. A lot of people tend to say things like, anyone who has violence as part of their ideology is bad, or there's no room for violence in politics, or something along those lines. But, as anyone with a brain should be able to zoom out and see, all politics involve violence. That's literally what politics is. How do you enforce the things you legislate? With the threat of violence. Violence is inseparable from politics. So, this means one of two things. Either you believe the state has a monopoly on violence, or you don't. People who I like to call bootlickers believe the state has a monopoly on violence, and that you should never ever ever use violence no matter what, because you should just be able to vote all your problems away. It doesn't matter that the system is completely fucking broken, there's still a system with rules, and you don't break those rules. Now, people who aren't bootlicking pieces of shit believe that after a certain point, something's gotta give. They believe that a system that's either too slow or too ineffectual to combat the injustices that inflict hundreds of thousands of lives daily doesn't deserve to be abided by 100% of the time. The difference between a bootlicker and a non-bootlicker is that when a bootlicker sees political violence enacted on people, they essentially just kick back and go, well, that's the way it goes sometimes, better wait till you can get into the voting booth to change it. They see the figurative, or literal, boot stamping on someone's head and go, don't like the boot? Well, I mean, you have the option of shining it with your tongue. Maybe you can change it from a military boot to more of a sneaker or a mountain climbing shoe. Maybe you can get it changed to a Dr. Scholl's shoe with the gel in it so you don't notice the shoe stamping on your head as much. Well, non-bootlickers see the figurative or literal boot stamping on someone's head for long enough that they get fed up and break the heel of that person stamping on their head. The bootlicker would see them do that and go, look, they're using violence! Oh, violence is bad! Whereas the non-bootlicker would view that merely as a form of self-defense. So, let's move away from analogies and get back to real life here. Let's go back to this milkshaking phenomenon. On one side, you have people saying that Muslims essentially can't integrate into what they'll call Western civilization, even though there's no such fucking thing, and that's really just a racist dog whistle. And on the other hand, you have people who are the immigrants, who are the political minority. Well, a lot of the rhetoric that gets spouted from these UKIP dipshits could be seen as political violence. What kind of violence exactly? Stochastic terrorism. Stochastic terrorism is defined as the public demonization of a person or group resulting in the incitement of a violent act, which is statistically probable but whose specifics cannot be predicted. The members of UKIP, alongside everything revolving around this Brexit shit, have amped up tensions between immigrants and the Brexiteers. People have noticed how blatantly hateful the rhetoric has become, and they're fed up with it, because we know where this kind of talk leads to. This blanket discrimination and demonization enables both physical and political violence, be it sparking fights between immigrants and European natives, or making politicians biased against entire groups of people, enacting prejudiced legislation against them. The people of Britain, who have a shred of humanity, see what the far right is doing in their country and want to fight back. However, they know that with physically fighting back, there comes a price. Your opponents crop out all the hateful shit that they say and only show themselves getting punched, so that way they can play the victim card and have everyone rally alongside them. So, the locals that see these asshats making their rounds have been making it a point to humiliate them rather than harm them. Now, is throwing a milkshake violent? No question. It is. But violence exists on a scale. There's chucking fish and milkshakes and stuff at people, and then there's, like, genocide and shit. Two completely different sides of the violence spectrum. So, the locals are taking the least violent measure possible while still circumventing casual politics and taking measures directly into their own hands. And honestly, when the people are fed up with something to the point where they begin to retaliate, you're really lucky it's milkshakes and fish and not way worse other things. When the people begin to mobilize because of a growing sense of impending darkness looming over their horizons, it makes me start to think milkshakes are the least of people's worries. I mean, really, milkshakes should be viewed as the people using restraint. They're people who want to commit civil disobedience while still abiding by their practice of not actually harming their target. Because the right understands violence. They understand that really well. What they don't understand, what really gets their brains to short circuit, is the feeling of humiliation. That's the feeling they're used to making other groups feel, not feeling themselves. They're used to marginalizing other groups, but they've never gotten a taste of their own medicine, so when they get pushed aside, they don't know why. They play dumb, or they're not playing, they are dumb. Whatever the case may be, they see themselves getting milkshaked and lack the complete fucking utter awareness to see why. So let's examine why the UKIP shitheads getting milkshaked is justified. One side of this shit show wants to crack down the law on entire groups of people. They spout hate and enable xenophobia, they flirt with nationalism, and these UKIP bastards have all said some really inflammatory shit in general that rightfully deserves a lot of flack.
It is not acceptable to call me a retard.
You know what? Fair enough. You can't change that you're a retard, and it's not very nice for me to call you a retard. I won't do it.
Or call yourself or your friends retarded.
Whoa. What are you talking about? What are you talking about, retard?
But let's discuss some of those comments that you've made in the past, and
I'm not really interested in discussing any of these comments, because you see, I've had something like 400 million views on my YouTube channels in total. I've got a huge audience. If people want to go see them, they can go watch them on my channel and see the context of them for themselves. So I'm not really interested in discussing any of those.
To call me a chink.
Aha! So, off chink, it's okay for me to call you this, because racism is power plus prejudice.
there are people who are deeply offended by some of the things that you said.
Well, I tell you what, they can go and have a cry, and when they've collected themselves, and they're ready to talk like an adult about the issues, and not bring up things that they think might be offensive, and spread them around the country to people who might be offended by them, then we can have a sensible conversation about the issues.
With the UKIP and its members, not only do you have the xenophobia dog whistling, but you also get the anti-feminism, the misogyny, and now that Milo's joined in, all the problematic bullshit that comes with him. The other side, either the general left or just people with a shred of humanity, is fighting for understanding, inclusivity, integration. If one side's over there going, they can't integrate, we gotta stop them, the other side's going, well, what are some ways we can better help them integrate into our society? One side is fighting for intolerance, the other is fighting for tolerance. And, because I feel like it needs to be stated, intolerance of intolerance isn't intolerance. That's the whole fucking point of all this. If you have a boot on your head, twisting the foot of that boot and casting it off in a way isn't intolerance. You don't also get to be the fucking party of intolerance, and then when people draw the line at a certain point, go, "How dare you? Look at how uncivil and violent you are. This is the land of the boot. How dare you cast that boot off?" So let's just look at it from one final angle here. People on the right, they fight for authority and hierarchy, which means big business, religion, tradition, and big-time capitalism, and thus the continued subjugation of marginalized groups. If they commit a politically motivated violent act, it's usually because they're at some kind of hierarchical, religious, traditional, capitalistic, misogynistic, or racial impasse. The people on the left fight for a flattening of unnecessary hierarchies. They fight for secularism, aka not preferring one religion over another. They fight against tradition if it holds people back. They fight against capitalism due to its extremely exploitative nature, or they can at least acknowledge that it has a very exploitative nature and can empathize with those getting screwed over by it. And they fight against misogyny and racism. So if a person commits a politically motivated violent act on the left, usually it's out of solidarity with those people who have been victimized. This is why you get cars being driven into crowds of people and incel murderers and shit from the right, and Antifa retaliation and milkshaking from the left. You see how one of these things is not quite like the other? So, let's just do a recap here. All politics involve violence, so fuck people who say there's no room for violence in politics. Say it with me. Politics is violence. Once you acknowledge that violence is inseparable from politics, you either believe the state has a monopoly on violence, or you don't. If you don't believe the state has a monopoly on violence, congratulations, you're not a bootlicker. And that opens up the discussion around when violence should be used or when it's justified. With that also comes the discussion of what kind of violence is warranted. Violence exists on a gradient, meaning all violence can't be equated. After enacting enough political violence against people, retaliation becomes a form of self-defense. Retaliation can take many forms, be it the way in which protesters mocked the heavily militarized police at the IMF and World Bank Summit in Prague back in 2000 by showing up in fairy outfits and tickling them with feather dusters, or the way they made a mock medieval catapult that flung soft plush toys at the police line protecting the FTTA reps in Quebec back in 2001, or the way far-right UKIP dipshits are getting milkshaked today. Those are the more peaceful retaliations. We all know what violent retaliation looks like. I really don't need to go into those examples. So anyway, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I hope we all feel a little more nuanced when it comes to the topic of politics and violence now. If you like our shit, be sure to subscribe. I'm ScowlingAl. This is the Podunk Punks. Have a good one.